get going, get out of here as quickly as we can, but I think this is an essential discussion that we need to have in town. And while I'm thankful for all the people who are here, I really wish we had a lot more folks here, because I think people really need to understand what's been happening to Haddam over the last, several decades or so. What's going on is that, well, Melissa passed out a chart which is effectively using some of the same numbers that I passed out. The numbers are a little bit somewhat difficult to get in that the towns had worked with grand list numbers from last year or ECS numbers from last year or this year, and I got sort of a mix of those. But I think the general thing that's happening here can be picked up very easily from what you see in this chart. I looked at it from the point of view of ECS dollars available per student, and looking at Dave. I looked at it from a point of view of how much money each town has available to support education. And that's what I'm referring to in the last column in my chart of grand list dollars available per student. And the next to last column is the amount that we are getting in terms of grand list dollars, the ECS dollars per student. So when you look at that, I think it's, you got to sort of try to understand and factor the ECS amount of ECS money that's coming to the town, but it's on a per student basis, and in terms of how much money we have available to raise funds, how much grand list we have available to raise funds for education. Now, Killingworth has basically 10%, almost 11% more grand list per student than Haddam, yet gets 82% more in ECS funding than we do. Killingworth is, in terms of GPS, grand list dollars per student, is richer than Haddam, and gets over $2 million, almost $2,400,000 for their 949 students, while we get $1.83 million to support our 1,300 students. East Haddam, it's even more out of sorts, has 9.5% more grand list per student available, yet gets 140% more in ECS funding than Haddam. Again, East Haddam is richer than Haddam in available funds per student, and yet they get almost 140% more than we do. A couple of things I wanted to tell you about ECS formula before I turn it over to the folks who are here, is that the formula is not being used to determine ECS dollars that each town receives. That has not been used since 2009. And in fact, the ECS formula has been overridden by the Legislative Budget Acts since 2009. And instead, the grants, the ECS grants, are specified in the legislative, in the bill. So you get, you get this ECS formula, which is complex, hard to understand. I looked at it and tried to get through it, but then I realized it doesn't make any difference because they're not even using the formula. If the formula were being used today, according to the legislative research, the Office of Legislative Research, the formula has not been updated since the 2000 census. So it would be out of date anyway, because if you recall, we lost our big piece of our grand list with CY in 2006. So it's way out of date. Anyway, I just wanted to tell you why I got excited about this and wanted to get people to understand what's going on. And I'm sorry to take so much of your time, but I'd like to have Bill introduce our panel. One last remark I should make. I tried to get someone from the State Department of Education to be here. I couldn't get anyone from that department. They sent me to a group called CASBRO, which is the Connecticut Association of School Business Officers, excuse me, business officers. That is basically useless because they're in the same situation that we all have. And the other, I also tried to get Ben Barnes of he's Secretary of OPM, I believe. And he's the guy who really his department has a tremendous amount of control of this thing. So couldn't get anybody from the state is the bottom line. I'm thankful to have the folks here who are here, and Phil Miller is not able to be here. Apparently he's involved in some kind of legislative business. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Bill Bowles, who's introduce the people and the folks here.
Pretty much to everything. But anyway, educational cost sharing is a concept about which I personally know very little. However, we are pleased that we have some folks on this dais that perhaps can explain it all to us. We have our first select woman, Melissa Schlag. We have our state senator, Martin Harris, and we have the chairperson of the Haddam Board of Education, Sue Twachtman, each of whom will perhaps give some brief remarks to open the discussion. Then we can take questions as the evening progresses. The idea here is hopefully this will be an informal exchange of information. At least we can learn a few things. I don't think we're going to solve the problem tonight, but at least we might be able to understand the problem a little better. There are laboratory facilities for those of you who are not familiar with the building. You actually go through that exit door, go straight to another door for the men's room. Well, then usually you go through those double doors, take a right, and it's on your left. The most compelling number that, in my brief exposure to this, that I have found is that we have more students than he's had by something like 140 kids or something like that. And yet they get twice as much, twice as much money for the sake of argument as we do in terms of the educational cost sharing. So I find that pretty compelling. But at any rate, without any further ado, I'm not even calling with our dais to find out who this offhand was. Okay, Mr. Schlag.
Thank Ed for, can you guys hear me? Or should I just yell? I'll just yell. Thank Ed Munster for inviting us all here and setting this up, because in my experience, grassroots is the way to really tackle any problem. I've been researching ECS now for almost a year, and it gets more depressing each time I research it. I did sit down with Art Linares and Phil Miller, the governor I finally got in with, the Office of Physical Analysis, the Education Committee, who else? OPM. So you name it, I've really attacked them in any way I could. And at least we've started the ball rolling. That's half the battle. I'll give you a little bit of a history just to add on to what Ed said, and I probably will repeat some things, so I apologize. Connecticut is one of the most reliant states on property taxes for funding for education. And that's a major problem when you don't get a lot of money from the ECS grant for your town. As Bill said, we do get half of what East Haddam gets, and they have double the students. And you'll see by the charts, their grant list is almost exactly the same, or their net equalized grant list. And the other problem is the mandates. The state has put so many mandates on us, and the community expects a certain type of student to exit school. When you add those two together and you look at what we get funded, it's pretty pitiful. And property taxes obviously fund the lion's share. And Haddam's ratio right now is 74% of our taxes go towards education. I think the average in the state, and Bart might know, is I think 60-something, 68. The formula is pretty complicated, and as Ed said, they're not even using it anymore. It's wealth of the town, number of students, and the need of the students in a very complicated way. And they are using old census data, and the other complication is the United States government is no longer taking wealth information for their census records, so they're really going to have to figure out some other way to figure that out, even if they go back to the formula. And they're going to have to completely overhaul the formula anyway. The last major change in the ECS formula was in 2007, hasn't been used since 2009. The legislature has just frozen it for the last 4 years. Let's skip over what Ed also said. And one interesting thing is we do have one of the strongest constitutions in the United States for education. If you read the Constitution, we are mandated to provide funding for education. Of course, we're not doing that. I think the ECS funds 46% of all education costs in the state. And we have also the worst achievement gap in the country, which is also an interesting statistic. And the mandates are funded. There is a lawsuit that is started in 2005 by the Connecticut Coalition for Justice of Education Funding. And they just got the green light in 2010 in a unprecedented green light for suing the state for proper funding because they've not been following the Constitution for funding the towns. The trial is actually scheduled for this September, and I'm hoping that that will at least start the ball rolling and make the state figure out some way to fund education. Unfortunately, though, I think it's going to have to mean a complete overhaul of our tax structure. There's no way that property taxes are going to be able to come up with that in the current way we tax people. Debevoise and Clinton, a New York law firm, is the one who's taking on the case pro bono, along with Yale Law School. And they've really been working on this hard since 2005. I'm really hoping that it takes hold. Their complaint, and this is verbatim, I actually met with their chairman on Friday. She came to Haddam and got to see our beautiful town. And she's excited that we are interested in possibly joining the lawsuit. But their complaint is unsuitability and inequality of education opportunities, as well as the subsequent harm suffered by students, is caused by the state's flawed education funding system, as evidenced by inadequate and inequitable education inputs and low levels and unconscionable disparities of education outputs. If you look at the graphs that I handed out, so you can take more time to ingest the information, it's going to make you ill. But you can see where CY was. I put a graph in here just because a lot of people don't understand why we're so underfunded compared to all other towns. When you look what CY was paying Haddam back in 1994, and then follow through to today, it's obviously significantly less. And as Ed said, they haven't adjusted the formula since they closed. The state does not have any pressure to do it. It's status quo right now until something really pushes it over the edge. And I'm hoping the lawsuit does that. It might not. We just have to keep beating on our legislators, Art and Phil and the governor. So I hope that through some grassroots efforts, I did start a petition online through change.org. I put it on a bunch of Facebook pages. We can pass that around. And that is a statewide petition. So it's not just for Haddam, because there are other towns that are in the same boat. We are the 10th worst funded town in the state. That's pretty pitiful. And when you look at it like that, it makes you feel the legislature thinks that you are the 10th richest town in the state. And obviously we all know that you're not the 10th richest town in the state. You can see on the ECS funding graph for all towns where everybody else is, all of our sisters and brothers up there at the top at the 86% mark. We're still stuck at 42. I did have the adjusted equalized net grand list number on the top of the second page. And you can see, as Ed said, Killenworth's wealth, the median household income, which is part of the formula, is a lot higher than ours. In fact, using these numbers, and this is from the 2013 CERC profile, Haddam is the second poorest compared to East Haddam, but they're $800. Richard. So it's pretty pitiful, but it starts here, and I think starting the conversation is all we can do at this point. And hopefully next year we can continue attacking our legislators with anything we can. And I'll keep a lookout for more information in the bulletin. We'll probably be doing an article, a more in-depth article, and then I'll also revisit who to contact at the legislature. Unfortunately, with the close of the session, it's going to be kind of quiet up there. But at least you guys know now, and then when we come back next year to really attack this in more earnest, then we're ready. And thank you guys for setting us up.
A lot of numbers, and none of it sounds too good. Sue, you want to go next, or?
Sure.
Okay, Sue Schwab.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sue Schwabman, and I'm the chair of the Board of Education, and I'm also a Haddam resident. I also want to thank Ed Munster for putting together this forum and really getting everybody talking about it. I also want to thank Melissa Schlack for her work and Art Linares for making the effort to try to rectify the situation for Haddam. I'm here representing the Board of Education, but we do have additional board members in our audience. We have Kathy Brown, who's a Haddam resident, and we have Becky Valente, who's Haddam resident, and we also have Superintendent Howard Theory, who came tonight. And I didn't ask him. It's a Sunday evening. I never would have expected him to come down, but he wanted to be here, and I think that speaks to his dedication to the community and his commitment for trying to get things equalized for Haddam. So thanks for being here, guys. Yes, the right to an education is explicitly stated in the state constitution. The state recognizes their obligation, and ECS funding is a perfect example of that. It is clear that Haddam is getting shortchanged in this when you look at the data. And the Board of Education feels very strongly that the state is not meeting their obligation to provide us with funds necessary to offset the cost of education. So I'm here tonight. I'm not an expert in ECS funding, but I'm here to listen to your comments and to hear what our panelists have to say, and we're really committed to trying to fix the problem, to do whatever we can do. And of course, I'd like to talk to Melissa more about maybe getting involved with that lawsuit that she mentioned. We can run that by the board and see if that's something that we can do. But truly, this is something that we really need to come together, I think, as a community to try to fix. So, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Sue. And now let's hear from Mark Linares, who is our state senator, represents 11 towns, including some of the towns that appear to be on the hate list. But he also thankfully represents our community as well, right?
Thank you all for being here today. I know it's a beautiful Sunday evening, and it just says a lot about the community that you've come out to listen to the panel on how we can solve this big issue for Haddam, which is the ECS funding. And it's actually 12 towns that I represent, by the way. But Haddam is one of them, and this actually was one of the first bills that I proposed this session, was to fix this problem. I had met with First Selectwoman Melissa Schlack early on before session had started, and the idea was to create a one-time fix for the town of Haddam. And to me, this is common sense. Haddam is being shortchanged on your ECS Forum, plain and simple. So I did propose a bill. The bill number was 118, and it was referred to the Committee on Education, of which I'm a member. I spoke with the chairwoman of the committee, Andrew Stillman. I worked very hard to see that this bill was pushed through. Unfortunately, this is a big issue with the state of Connecticut, not just for Haddam, with all the towns, but to me, I felt like Haddam deserves the funding to replace its ECS share. So my proposal, and I have a statement here that I'd like to read. My proposal aims to adjust the state's education cost-sharing formula in order to compensate Haddam for a lost revenue created by the closing of the Connecticut Yankee nuclear power plant. I propose this bill because the town's grand list has taken a huge hit since the power plant closed its Haddam Neck location in 2006. The plant was the town's largest employer when it was open and made up a large percentage of the town's grand list value of close to $300 million. However, the value dropped to $30 million when it was closed in 2006, and it has caused a substantial shift in the town's education budget. When the formula was fixed in 2007, the town took into consideration that the power plant was still in business. So we're now asking the state for $600,000 a year to repair those losses as a result of the power plant closing. I feel it's a common sense fix, and I really wish that the governor would have taken that into consideration. My understanding is that there was a $50,000 increase in the budget that was passed last night. I have to get the details. I have not seen the details on that at the moment, at this time, but it's still short. We need to do much better than that. So it is a priority of mine. It's something that I've been pushing. It's a big issue. It's an issue that towns all across the state like Haddam are facing. In the meantime, we have to find a way to improve the grand list in this town. If you look at Essex, they have a lot of industry, a lot of manufacturing that makes up their grand list. So that's one avenue that I think could help. So I propose a bill called the Manufacturing Reinvestment Account, which passed the Senate unanimously. And it's in the House now, awaiting a vote, hopefully next week. Working very hard on that bill because it would allow manufacturers to create a bank account that they can keep money in tax-free, as long as they use that money to invest in property, plant, and equipment, or invest in job creation. I think that's exactly the kind of bill that will help manufacturers grow and help manufacturers decide to start in Connecticut. I think a manufacturing facility in Haddam could be a great opportunity to improve the grand list if it's done appropriately and responsibly. So that's one avenue. I have a lot of other pro-economic bills that are floating around the legislature at the moment. Most of them have bipartisan support. I think that's the real key that we can focus on. Aside from fixing the ECS formula, aside from holding our governor accountable for fixing the ECS formula, we should really be focusing on job growth and helping towns like Haddam increase the amount of people that are working in the state, increase the amount of people that are living here, and ultimately the amount of people that are paying taxes. So I just wanted to thank Ed Munster for inviting me to be here today. I think it's a very important issue. It's a priority of mine. And after meeting with the first select woman, I think that it's a bipartisan issue. It's something we're all on board with. I would like to thank the Superintendent Theory for being here today. I've gotten to know him over the past 2 years. Very nice guy. I think Haddam is well ahead of the curve and has a great school system here. So thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Okay, we've had some, we've had some opening comments. The table has been set. Maybe I'll ask the first question, and then we can turn it over to the audience. Because I'm just trying to understand the problem, and it might be, from what everyone has said here, somewhat of a moot point. In that we're talking about an ECS formula that apparently has not been used since 2009. So I guess my first question is when this formula is applied, one of the elements is wealth of the town. on the basis of grand list, or is that figured on the basis of statistics with respect to the actual residents who live in? And I guess I'll throw that one out, and then we'll see where everyone else goes.
Both, actually. His household income and the adjusted net, again, is part of this, the net equalized adjusted grand list, which is 100% instead of the 70% of your property. And then they also throw in the wealth of the household, and then also the needs of each student. If you have students that don't speak English, you get 15% more. And again, they haven't used the formula, but 33% more if you have, I think it's either minorities. We don't really have those issues here in Haddam. What we were trying to do is, Art and I were trying to do the one-time adjustment. Since they haven't used the formula, just give us an extra $600,000. Very easy. They didn't like that, so they have adjusted other towns like this in the past. We thought that this one adjustment for us, just to bring us up, we're in the other towns that are at the bottom there, some of them are bigger cities. But it didn't work this time. Obviously, we'll keep at it.
I agree. I think that, I know Melissa is on board, our first selectman, Schlag is on board, and myself, and I believe Phil's not here, but I believe that he would support this as well. It's something that we all need to push for. It's clear that this is a common sense change, that you deserve these funds, and this should be a one-time fix that is fair. And so it's something that we need to keep working on, and that's something I'm committed to doing for all of you in the state legislature. Yes.
If you don't use the formula, what is the basis for allocation, and what do you do to change it? Who makes that decision?
The decision is made by the governor and the legislature, which is currently controlled by Dan Malloy and Don Williams and Brendan Sharp. So those are three very important points of contact that I think we need to put.
So is this just backroom politics? Is that what we're talking about?
I think that it's clear that there is a formula, that is a plan in place on how to use this funding, and it's not being used. So it's clear to me that this is politics, and we have to fight for a change.
And I think I'll just add one quick thing, and I think Howard has something before too, is that it's very easy to keep everything status quo. When a town gets $2 million, or if we get $1.8 million, that's free money. The town says, oh, okay, $1.8 million, that's a lot of money. But then when you do look at what other towns get, then you start to question. I don't know how many other towns really question this. Maybe First Selectman have, and they said, well, there's nothing we can do. But when you look at it as a whole, and you look at any of the towns that are 50% or underfunded, it's pretty sad. So I think it's a bigger issue, but I think people just tend to give up and not want it. I think Howard has hit it.
Yes, to kind of address a couple of questions on the table. The formula has 3 or 4 different components. One of them is the wealth basis, and that's been described really well. Melissa got into the needs basis, so they have the wealth basis, which is kind of a bunch of factors that have tried to determine the ability of a town to pay. And it tries to capture those factors, and as has been pointed out, they're absolutely correct. Even if you capture all those factors, the data they're using is widely outdated. It's 2000 at the latest, and much of it is even goes back. When you actually track the individual pieces, they go back further than that because they're pieces that are only collected 10, 15, or 20, every 10, 15, or 20 years. So there's the ability to pay. Then there's the need basis, which is things like, it's poverty. And so if you have a high poverty factor, there's actually a multiplier that adds to your money. If you have a lot of English language learners, there's a multiplier factor that adds to your money. If you have a lot of minorities, there's a multiplier factor that adds to your money. Our school district and our towns have very little of any of the multiplying factors, and all of the wealth factors are completely outdated and based on Yankee nuclear. Also embedded in the formula were capping mechanisms that were basically, they were variables put in to cap the amount that any district would go, or any town would go up in any given year. The idea was to buffer the state from any of these sudden fluctuations that happen to towns. And that's why when we talk about 50% of the towns in the state being underfunded, that's because not only has the wealth formula or the ability to pay formula changed for towns like ours, in other towns, you've seen 100 and 200 and 300% increases in minorities in English language learners. That hasn't happened to us, but it's happened to others. So those factors have gone up. And nothing about the payment has changed. And so you end up with this kind of fixed static payment stuck well in the past, with the state kind of protected and capped. And as far as how they're doing it now, what they did in around 2009 is they started with the funding numbers. They didn't just pick numbers out of the hat to give the towns. They started with the formula numbers. But then what they've done with the budget for almost all categories for the last several years is they started with old numbers, and then they just slide them around based on their ability to pay and politics. Who's yelling the most, who's screaming the most. One of the factors that hasn't been brought up that I'd like to see explored, and I think this is one of the things that's getting in our way. The governor and the commissioner 2-3 years ago, because of the CCJEF suit, instituted a special task force on ECS. This task force has been doing what things called task forces do. They've been meeting and ruminating and meeting and ruminating and meeting and ruminating and meeting and ruminating. They actually produced preliminary results a little while ago, about 12 months ago or so. No one to the best of my knowledge, and I'm kind of on the inside, I guess, has ever laid eyes on it. So I have no idea what those look like or what they would do. Certainly any adjustment, any new ECS formula would in fact potentially produce a correction to us, because it would start fresh. It would start from a new place. It's kind of what we're asking for, and kind of what your $600,000 does. It kind of starts fresh at a new kind of starting point. But that funding task force is there, and I think that's what's creating part of that fear of the State Department, because there's this sense that oh yeah, we know ECS is broken, and it's like, no, you don't understand. You know that the frame's broken, but we're telling you there's no wheels too. Yes, it's broken, but for the town of Haddam, it's super broken. It's broken all across the state. That's great, but I think it creates kind of a tone deficit. We're yelling about it being broken, and their attitude is, yeah, so is everyone else, and they don't understand. But no, it's actually more broken for some than others. The last piece I just want to add, because as you follow CCJEF, which is not a new suit. I was in graduate school some 10 odd years ago, and I had to write a paper on CCJEF. Okay?
2005, I just started.
Yeah, and so, yes, they're going to trial now, but this is not, although this is interesting, if we wait for that to come out, this is going to be one of those long trials. It's going to be one of those trials that as soon as the result happens, it's going to go to the next level, to the Supreme Court, and probably, there's been 3 other states that have had suits similar to this, and they've taken decades to work out. But what Melissa brought up is absolutely correct. There were 2 standards established in that case, and they're important for you to understand. One is equity, and that's one of the things we're worried about here. These pieces of paper really do a nice job of showing inequity. But the other one, it's a different angle on educational funding, and it's one that, to be honest with you, I don't know where it will go, and it could have very large results around tax structure and how education is funded, and that's adequacy. Because it not only talks about, are we funding each town equitably, but are we funding education adequately? And getting a group of people to define what adequate education looks like is a real knot, and could be a real mess. And maybe a mess in a good way. Some good things may come out of it, I don't know, but it's a unique standard. Only a couple states have successfully used it, and it's created massive tax overhauls on a state basis. So this adequacy and equity thing is something you're going to want to pay attention to as we move forward. But I think we have to push hard despite the fact that everyone else will look at you and say, we're already focused on this. No, you're not. You're not focused on this. You're focused on this. So.
Maybe I'm being naive, but I think I understood you saying that the state is contractually obligated to fund education, that there's a mandate to do that?
I think that's a constitutional.
It's a constitutional mandate to fund education. And they are now, not before, they're incompetent, and why can't we just sue them right now? Why do we have to wait for some class action thing? Seems to me that this is criminal, it's not just oversight.
That's what the lawsuit is, yeah. They had to first get the okay to sue, you needed okay to sue the state. So they got that in 2010, and that's what the suit is, starting in September. But as Howard said, I mean, it's gonna be a long overhaul process. But it doesn't mean that we can't keep fighting grassroots level. Yeah, but yeah, that's exactly what the lawsuit is.
And
I guess I didn't know.
well, you know, it's a lawsuit is one way, opposing the bill is another way, and this is a political situation. I think it's important to know where candidates for governor stand on changing this problem, and I think that that's why we have elections. You need to take that into consideration when you're at the ballot box.
Mark, you mentioned that there was $50 billion in new money going into ECS funding. According to what I read in the paper, with some internet, 40 million of that is going to 30 towns, which are basically the alliance. But those are basically the cities, along with the places where, in fact, I hate to say it, but that's where the government gets itself elected. And so you say about it being political. That's specifically what's, that's where the money, they put some more money in, but it doesn't filter to the dozens of towns which are being shortchanged. We're probably being shortchanged, in a sense, a lot more than many of those towns, but there are dozens of towns who feel the same way. And so that is you're rightfully pointing out, there's a lot of politics going on in this whole thing. And $50 billion in new funding might sound great in the headline, but it's not coming this way. I mean, we're going to get, I think, about 2.8% increase, if I understood. Okay. I think when you realize that we've been shortchanged by basically 140% compared to East Haddam, that's like getting 3 cents on when you really owed $1.40. So I mean that's the proportion of this thing is that. And so I mean this is like almost an insult to get that 3%. Although we'll take it.
Yeah, it's like 20,000 to 25,000. And another interesting thing is that in the past 25 years of the ECS formula, it's only gone up $65 million total with using cost of inflation, 65 million over 25 years. So it shows you how flat it's been.
And so 50 million getting added this year.
Yeah.
Well, no, the 50 million added this year is to education spending as a whole,
Yeah.
not to ECS, to the best of my knowledge, right?
Yes.
It wasn't $50 million new in ECS, it was education funding.
I think the only substantial increase was West Hartford. They're the only school system that got a serious increase in ECS. Which they have a lot of businesses there. They're doing pretty well as far economically. We would have liked to have seen a greater increase in Haddam. Certainly, we'll take the 3%. But we need to do more. We can't stop there.
All right.
That's the idea.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm starting to get confused again. Of course, I'm always confused. But we're talking about ECS, and ECS doesn't exist, hasn't been used since 2009, correct? Correct.
The formula.
The formula. Okay, so the formula has not been used. We're also talking about funding for education, $50 million, as opposed to ECS. Isn't ECS funding for education? Or if not, what would some of the other elements of that $50 million be?
I'll start and then you can finish. Yeah, so there's a municipal end, which is the ECS, that comes to the town. Then there's the Board of Ed, the regional district funding, which goes directly to the school district. And how are we going to add to that with special ed if you want to do
Yeah, actually, we get very little of that too, to be honest with you. So you have, the state directs money for education 2 different ways. It puts it directly in education, a variety of ways, with special education grants and a variety of other state grants. That's certainly in this district, largely what we get from the state is special education grants. We get a very small transportation grant. And so, but there's lots of other money. If you are an Alliance district, you are getting lots of different grants. You're getting parent involvement grants from the state, you're getting school and community grants, you're getting school governance grants, you're getting technology grants, and to be honest with you, I will say, actually, the last year we got a security grant and a technology grant from the state, so I'm grateful for both of those. I don't ever want to make it sound like I'm not grateful for what the state gives me. I am. So there's money that goes directly to the schools in a variety of different ways, again, based on what the state perceives largely to be need, actually. And so most of that money goes exactly where it got pointed out. It goes to the very large urban centers, and it also goes to a few smaller towns and districts who are, one of the big indicators is if you are a poor performing school district. To be an Alliance district, you have to be a poor performing school district, meaning you have low student achievement, high student dropout, etc. They get lots and lots more money, and it really is lots more money. I really can't express how much different it
They
is.
also have to meet criteria, right, in order to...
They do. Well, I'll be honest with you, the other thing they get with that money
Yeah.
is a massive loss of local control over what they do with their schools. And I mean a massive loss of local control over what they do with schools. Right down to the point that a couple of them actually have, rather than a superintendent, they have a state overseer who actually sits above the superintendent and controls the schools. And so with that money comes a lot of baggage and burden, so I'm not saying I necessarily want some of it. But the other pool of money goes to the communities. And this is the constitutional portion, actually, mostly. A lot of the special ed stuff is actually federally mandated and other things. But under the state constitution, we're one of the few states that has a guaranteed right to an education from the state level. They guarantee a right to an education. And because of that, the state has an obligation to help fund education. ECS is the state's way to help the town fund education. What they say is, okay, town, each and every town, you pay for education, you decide what you're going to pay, and we'll decide what we give you as it's really a reimbursement for all intents and purposes. It helps offset your costs. If you get a lot of it, it offsets lots of your cost. If you get a little of it, it offsets little of your cost, and you end up as a community bearing the burden, rather than the burden being split between the state and the town. In big urban environments, the state is disproportionately carried by, or the cost is carried by the state, in fact, and much smaller piece carried by the community. In towns like ours, it's vastly carried by the community with a very small portion being carried by the state. So you have two funding streams, one direct to education and one direct to the town. In a community like this, we largely get pretty little from each. You can actually look at our budget and see our revenue piece. It's under $1 million total from the state. And so the rest of it is borne by the two communities. Long with it, sorry.
And I just actually have a question. What was the shift as far as your budget goes regarding special education this year? Was there
The shift in special education this year is twofold. One, special education is always fluid because it's the actual students that are in our schools. And the students in our schools change year to year. They move in, they move out. And so in some years we have more special education students, and in some we have less. Next year, we're projecting, based on the students we have now, so we don't guess. We actually say the students we have right now, if we project them forward to next year, it's an increase of a couple $100,000 in special education costs. However, there is a grant that comes to us from the state called the Excess Cost Grant. And the Excess Cost Grant is supposed to, it's a lot like ECS, it's supposed to reimburse us for our special education costs. Because if we're doing extraordinary things for some kids who have extraordinary needs, and I feel privileged to be able to do that for those students, the state bears some of that burden. Let me see if you can follow how this works. The formula, again, there's a formula. The formula for excess cost works in such a way that depending upon what kind of kids you have, depending upon how much they cost actually, you get different amounts of money. That might feel fair because it might feel like the more they cost, the more money you get. And in fact, that's not how it works. Basically, the way it works is we own the first 66%, we own the first 2.5 times our per pupil expenditure. So for us, that's $66,000. We own the first $66,000 of every student. So if there's a special education student that costs $100,000, we pay $66,000, we get $34,000 back from the state. okay? So if you look at that, if you have 5 students that cost $100,000, that's $500,000 outlay by the district, right? And we will get 5 times $34,000 back from the state. So that's about, let's call it $170,000. I think that's actually right. So we get $170,000 back from the state. If, however, and this doesn't happen, it's just an analogy, don't go away talking about the $500,000 kid. But if we had one student that cost $500,000, which is the same amount of money, we would still only get, we would pay, you can see it coming, okay? We would get very little. We would get very much more back. We would actually get $450,000 back, $466,000 back. And we pay the same $34,000. So if you have very high cost kids, you get a lot back from the state. But if you have many medium cost students, which is, in all honesty, in a town like that, that's a lot of what we have. We have a lot of students with some needs, and we support those needs. But we don't have the very, very expensive kids that some urban centers have. And so we don't, again, same formula, and so next year, just because of the students we have and the nature of the cases, we're projecting a decrease in our ECG. And so we have more kids for special ed next year, but we're projecting less money back from the state because of it. And again, the other thing about ECG, you can understand, and Art, I've talked to Art about this, is that every year, I told you that we owe 66 and they give us 34, but every year, just like Ed brought up in budget season, they actually start sliding the numbers around and deciding how much they're really going to give us. So every February they look at us and say, oh, I know I owe you $34,000 on that student, but this year things are tight, so we'll only give you 17, okay?
And I'd like to thank the superintendent for informing me on this issue when I first got elected. And you know, it's a huge issue. In Westbrook, their budget increased $600,000 from this alone. So Ed Munster had mentioned that there was a $50 million increase in education spending passed in this budget. I proposed an amendment along with my colleagues on the Republican caucus to fully fund at ECS, which is conveniently named ECS, and to fully fund that formula for special education so that it would help a town like Haddam. Unfortunately, it was struck down by the legislature, but it was on a partisan vote. So I think it's something that we're all taking very seriously, and it's unfortunate, but the money went to other areas that I think are directed for political purposes. I think it's crazy.
What can we do?
Well, my humble opinion is the first step is to support the people that support this cause, and that's in the ballot box. The second thing I think we can do is definitely look into the lawsuit, call legislators, write your legislators, and not just me, not just Phil, but the Speaker of the House, the President of the Senate. It looks like that will be Martin Booney next year, and let's keep pushing this. Not just them, every single one of them. And then we need to look into other towns. It appears that half the state towns and half the towns in the state are being underfunded. We need to reach out to them and get them on board. They need to write their legislators. It becomes very difficult to vote against an amendment that fully funds ECS when you know when the people that elect you support it. So I think, like Melissa had mentioned, a grassroots effort is really needed to make this change, and I've seen changes like that made in the legislature because when we get those emails, when we get those phone calls, it's a call to action. So I think those steps are appropriate.
Harlan.
When I hear about a bill being proposed that puts $600,000 more towards Haddam to help even this discrepancy, I think that's great and appreciate your efforts. Unfortunately, didn't get anywhere. When I hear talk of a lawsuit, I get concerned, and my reason is that right now I know personally my property taxes that fund education here in Haddam are definitely smaller than my state income tax, state sales tax, and all the other state taxes that I pay. So I know that I send a lot of money up to Hartford. I don't see very much of it coming back to Haddam. And so when we put 50 million more into education funding in general, that's coming out of my left pocket, and I don't see a lot coming back into my right pocket. When I hear talk of a lawsuit that's going to change the whole formula, I guess I'd like somebody to comment on whether they think, is that going to benefit Haddam, or is Haddam going to be left in the same mess we're in right now, and we're all just going to be paying more state income tax, state sales tax, other state taxes to simply fund education in other cities?
I can answer that a little bit. I think there's no way, if you look at what the state would have to come up with for the complete 100% ECS money, it's not going to happen through the property tax system. So it would have to be a complete overhaul of, we're the most dependent state on property taxes to fund education. So I think it will take a long time to come up with another way. It's not just an easy fix.
But if it's a non-property tax fix, and I understand property tax is an issue, if it's a non-property tax fix, I'm very concerned that it actually is going to end up costing me even more for education, because I'm going to be paying to educate a whole lot of kids outside of the state. I mean, outside of the town of Haddam. And I'm not, I'm gonna save $500 in property tax, and I'm gonna spend $1,000 in income tax. Frankly, I'll leave it be the way it is, if that's gonna be the effect.
Thank you. One quick little funny thing that I found in my research, actually two. There was some mistakes made in the formula as well. There was some houses or some, I can't remember if it was dorms from Wesleyan that were included in the East Hampton's ECS formula. And Summers Prison, all the prisoners are included in Summers' ECS formula. So even though it's, there's things like that.
Would they be under the special needs or?
So for practical purposes, for fiscal year 2014-15, is the ECS funding issue now a fait accompli?
At this point, yes. The budget was debated until the wee hours of today. And it's in stone at this point. We thought we were going to have a $500 million surplus. We found out a couple days ago that we actually only have a $50 million surplus, and that actually $75 million was found out of thin air through this tax amnesty program. Well, they exhausted the tax amnesty program, which was $150 million that allowed people to pay back taxes that they owed to the state. What they found was that there were people that didn't exercise, they didn't use the program. So there's people that haven't paid their taxes that still have money in their bank account. A woman from Haddam, who owns a business here, had her bank account frozen. DRS took the money and sent her a letter saying, I'll see you in court. They're going to find $75 million, they think, from people who haven't paid their taxes. So they're finding $75 million of new taxes for people who haven't paid their taxes. I'm a little concerned about that method. It's $75 million that I'm not so sure we're going to get. It's not, in my mind, a great way to balance the budget. I think what we need to do is have a plan in place for 10 years to find a way to balance it, to reduce the size of our government in a very, very responsible way. And I think it can be done. Instead, we're increasing the size of our government 2.5%. We're hiring 500 new employees. That's 500 new mouths to feed. That's 500 new families to feed in the state of Connecticut in a time when we can't balance our budget and our deficit is $1 billion in the out years. It's really important to take that into consideration when we're voting in November.
Yeah, I'm back.
I just needed a clarification. Probably the superintendent might be able to help. On the special need formula for funding, is that governed by the same board that would be governing the formula that was used years ago for ECS?
Sure, yeah. ECG and ECS are all coming out of Office of Fiscal Management and OPM. And ultimately legislation, are both legislatively driven. And they're both very, they've been around as long as I've been in education, it's about 26 years now, and they probably go back further than that.
And your funding is routinely granted, methodically, you get it every year, and yet...
We do get it every year, but it slides around a lot. Matter of fact, in my budget every year, we actually project what we'll get from the state, and because it slides around, we tend to project at a conservative 65% of what we're supposed to get, because in the last 10 years, it's been funded anywhere from 60% to this year it was an all-time high. We got 81.2% of what we were supposed to get. So that's still below what we're supposed to get, but you actually learn to be happy with getting a lot of what you're supposed to get instead of all what you're supposed to get. I've been in Memphis, there's a couple other educators here. We've all been on both the long end of the stick and the short end of it, where you project 65%, and the next thing you know, they come in at 60, and now you have a budget shortfall. And they don't tell you, you don't know until February of the year you're already in. In February of the year you're in, so you're 2/3 of the way through your school year, you finally figure out from the state what you're getting, and you only figure it out because you get half your check then. And so you quickly do a quick calculation to figure out how much you're getting.
Thank you.
Cheryl.
Cheryl House, just a quick question. If we're not using a formula that we're supposed to be using, if we fix the formula, use the formula, how many of the 169 towns are sort of in the same position as us, and does that actually maybe put us in less funding potentially, or at the same level of funding if there are a lot of the towns that are similar to where we're at? So do we say fix the formula, or do we just pursue individual funding just for ourselves and continue to do it that way and leave status quo?
Well, part of the formula is also towns are held harmless. So there are towns that are getting more than 100%, but they're held harmless, so they're capped there. It also depends on what funding the state's going to give. So the formula would shift around. If the state says they have X number of dollars and then they do the formula, potentially it could be less. But with that part of the formula in there, it's saying that a town is held harmless, will never get less than $1.8 million right now, or $1.8 million.
So they can't go less than what we're getting?
Well,
Or
I guess
percentage-wise?
Right, it could, I guess, but I'm sure you have a lot of towns that are pretty upset. So, yeah. Also, one other quick thing, and this is, I think, important to remember. The chair of the Education Committee, which does have some leeway over the ECS money and funding, is Andrea Stillman, and she is the senator of Waterford, who is the only other town in the state that has nuclear power plants. So this is something to remember. In 15 years, she'll be in the same boat that Haddam's in. So I think we like to play to that aspect for really trying to push out to give us some help here, because they will also be, hopefully the formula will be fixed then, but might not be. So, and I'll make sure that everybody gets the information on who to contact, who to call, who to write to, email, this kind of thing.
That's the important part I was here for.
Yeah,
Very informative.
yeah, I should have brought a list, but I'll get a nice list for you guys. I'll put it up on Facebook, put it in the bulletin. You guys can
You can put it up on the district website.
Yeah, I'll put it on the town website.
Okay. One of the things I would just say too, and I want to thank you for putting that bill forward. But it's not a but. I think as each session arises, I think we need to recraft the bill and put it forward again. Because this was a short session. We're just starting to get momentum around this. If we can work hard with letters, if we can work hard with getting up there and educating, if we can get people to understand that yes, the system's broken, but Haddam is uniquely broken, when the bill comes up each time, it may gain more traction because we'll have educated some people in between. Not getting past this time, we can't get our heads down.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. We're going to keep working on this. Often it takes a few cracks at it before we get a bill passed. And I think that that's what we're going to have to do. I'd be happy to propose the bill again in the next long session.
And long sessions, as you know, it's easier to get more pressure applied, it's easier to tangle things up. And short sessions, it's easy for them to just say, oh, it's short session, we have too much to pay attention to.
I learned a quote from our first select woman day last week, and that is from Big Group, and we put this right out. So, that applies to this too. Ed?
I just want to say that when I asked people to come to this meeting, I knew very well that the chances of us getting any satisfaction in this legislative session were next to nil. However, I also chose the date, this Sunday, today, only because I think maybe more people were thinking about the budget process. In fact, we'll be voting on education, the school board budget on Tuesday. And so maybe we get a few more people out to hear about this. And I think it is a long-term effort. I'm frustrated by what's happened to Haddam over the years. And I know, I'm sure others in here are equally frustrated. I think, I don't know whether Ben Barnes is the right guy to go after. Maybe it's Stillman, maybe it's somebody else, the governor. Maybe we have to educate reserve candidates about the issue. But it's a long process, not one that we're going to solve with 30 or 40 people here on a Sunday night in Haddam. But I wanted to get the ball rolling, and I appreciate you guys for being here.
And perhaps on that note, unless there are any other questions, I thank our panel for coming. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. I don't think we solved the problem at all, but I think I learned something, and hopefully some of you other folks have. Oh, we have.
I think I have a question. The long term, you mentioned, Melissa, that we possibly could increase our generous by increasing the business and manufacturing. I know that's going to take some time. Is there any possibility of doing that? Are you looking into that?
Yeah, I'm actually working with a property owner that has 5 lots in Tylerville, 2 industrial lots, and 3 commercial lots, which could be a nice little industrial park. And I'm going to personally talk to a few business owners to maybe get some people in there. She hasn't had any bites yet, but she just changed real estate agents. The other one wasn't doing the right job. So she's going to be doing it actually herself, really getting the word out. So I'm going to help her there. We also are looking at some grants potentially for maybe sewers in Hingham, also some grants to clean up the Scoville buildings. And I'm also going to attack the state for more money for water for Tylerville, because nothing's going to happen in Tylerville until they get clean water. There is still the investigation going on by DEP to try to find the source of pollution and clean it up. So hopefully we'll find something there, maybe not. But so we're kind of going at it from all different angles. But no matter how you look at it, you're never going to find commercial property that's going to bring in $2 million, $2 additional $1 million, what we should get for the ECS. So, but it's, I think you have to do, look at it from all different perspectives. So yeah.
And I think that's awesome. And I'll tell you what, Melissa, if you find someone that wants to move, a manufacturing plant that wants to move to Haddam, I will pick them up at the airport. And I'll drive them here. I think it's so important that we drive economic development in this area. So I'm on board.
Yeah, and pass the word. It's Brooks Court. If anybody knows any people who want to start a business here, I know an industrial park has been thrown around by a bunch of people before. They're great flat lots. Water is there, ready to go. So yeah, maybe I'll talk to Art about some potential candidates. Green skies can move too.
Thank you.
All right, folks. Thank you all for coming.